Dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for our blessings. Thank you for this camp meeting. Thank you that we can come together and fellowship and study. I pray that we'll understand your word, Lord, and the times that we're living in, that we'll become closer together and that we'll have a better knowledge of who you are and what you're about. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everything that we study this week, really do believe, as best as I can think, everything is going over one framework. And those are the frameworks of our reform lines. So before we get into our other subjects, Acts 27, battles in history, I first want us to consider our reform lines. So we're going to spend probably most of this morning just studying those reform lines so that when we go to a history we know what we're laying it over. We'll start with the reform line of the 144,000. Begins in 1989. At the time of the end. Then we would mark 9/11. Sunday law. Close of probation. Second Advent. I want to call this Daniel 12:1. Michael stands up. This is our basic framework of the line of the 144,000. You can see 4 periods of time. If we were to take the model of agriculture, first of all there's a ploughing, 1989 to 9/11. From 9/11 to Sunday law, it's the early rain. Sunday law to Daniel 12:1 is the latter rain. And we know from Daniel 12:1 to the second Advent is a time period of harvest. It's also Jacob's time of trouble, what we call Jacob's time of trouble. So it's there's 4 spaces, 4 periods of time, the 4 steps of agriculture from ploughing to early rain to latter rain to harvest. Over this we can lay the line of the Millerites, the beginning of modern Israel. Time of the end is 1798. 9/11, we can mark 2 dates that we bring together. April 19, 1844, but also August 11, 1840. Sunday law, July 21. Their close of probation, October 22. And the second Advent, we're marking as 1863, what should have been 1863. That's something that Elder Parminder has put in the record based on the 2520 and the 19 years. But if you're unfamiliar with the date of 1863 being placed over that waymark, you can at least recognise that it was meant to be in that history. So we take these 4 periods of time and we can bring them into Millerite history and see 1798 and 1989, the 2 time of the ends. 9/11, then Sunday law, Daniel 12:1, second Advent. These are the 4 main periods of time. Within this first period, 1989 to 9/11, we could mark an increase of knowledge. Until it's formalised. So from the time of the end, we know that the knowledge increases. If we were to go to Millerite history, Great Controversy, GC 88, .2. She's speaking of William Miller. She says that he had devoted 2 years to the study of the Bible, when in 1818 he reached the solemn conviction that in about 25 years Christ would appear for the redemption of his people. So here we mark 1818. It's in 1991 that Elder Jeff starts laying out Daniel 11 verse 40 to 45. This becomes important, something we're going to continue to revisit, this 2-year history, 1989 to 91, particularly when we consider external events. It swelled until 1996. In 1996, we have the Time of the End magazine. And that message was formalised. Great Controversy 332.1. In 1833, Miller received a license to preach from the Baptist church of which he was a member. A large number of the ministers of his denomination also approved his work, and it was with their formal sanction that he continued his labours. His work was formalised in 1833. So at the very beginning of the reform line for this movement and for Adventism, it opened with an unsealing at the time of the end. Then there is an increase of knowledge, it's formalised, and then you're tested on it. When we come to the end of our probationary period, if we were to consider Sunday law, what begins at Sunday law? There's an increase of knowledge, what you could call a swelling, till you come to the waymark of the loud cry. If this was Millerite history, July 21 started a swelling that swelled until the midnight cry of August 14, 15. And then the test, October 22. This is a quote by Joseph Bates in the Pioneer Writings. He says, at midnight a cry was raised. When was midnight? Midnight is July 21, midway between April 19 and October 22. So prophetically they see July 21 as midway or midnight. It's when the cry begins. The bridegroom is coming, go ye out to meet him. Then all the virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. He says, we have already shown that the tarrying time for the bridegroom by the prophetic periods was 6 months, from April 19 to October 22. The midnight of this dark time is about July 20th. He's off by 1 day, it was July 21. Here Samuel Snow gave the true midnight cry in the tabernacle in Boston at this time, and it was received by the virgins in a different light from what it ever was before. So this is the Boston camp meeting. July 21 marked the Boston camp meeting. We know that August 15 was Exeter. At midnight, in the dead of the night of the tarrying of the bridegroom, the cry was raised. A camp meeting was next held in Concord, somewhere about August 1. Here, as we afterwards learned, the cry resounded throughout the camp. Where does the cry next sound? It's not Exeter, it's Concord. On the 12th of August, another was held in Exeter. So between Boston and Exeter, there's another camp meeting. This is the camp meeting of Concord. August 1. This is July 21. This camp meeting of Exeter began August 12. And if you consider the beginning of that camp meeting, Concord is also midnight or midway. Midway between July 21 and August 12, when Exeter begins. So we have at the beginning, the very beginning of our reform line, we have an unsealing of a message. It swells. There's an increase of knowledge, formalisation and a test. We come to the very end of our reform line, and what we see is a repeating pattern. Here we have Sunday law. There's a swelling, which is an increase of knowledge. It's formalised at the loud cry, and there's a test. So this is the exact same pattern. We could see this also as the swelling of a cry, and we could see this also as an increase of knowledge. That's an identical repeating structure. If we were to bring this down and consider the reform line of the priests, we have the same beginning, 1989. It swells to 1991. It's formalised in 1996. And then the test, 9/11. It's the same pattern. The same pattern that you could call Boston, Concord, Exeter, test. Then from 9/11, we could then mark 2014, (2019), Panium. 2014 becomes Sunday law. There was an increase of knowledge. It's formalised. And then a test. So we're taking this structure of Boston, Concord, Exeter and bringing it down to this structure. We can already see with external events and also with the internal message that there's a waymark between 2014 and 2018, and that is 2016. Major external events, the Battle of Ipsus, and also our understanding of the first verses of Daniel chapter 11. So, just with the reform line of the priests, we see that same structure. Of Boston, Concord and Exeter. And then a test. I want to refer us to a couple of quotes. Ellen White is talking about the events after the close of probation. both from the Great Controversy. First, Great Controversy 615.2 and 640.2. I just want to paraphrase a couple of sentences. 615.2, she says, the Sabbath has become a special point of controversy throughout the world. Religious secular authorities have combined to enforce its observance. The persistent refusal of a small minority to yield to that demand makes them the objects of universal execration. The same argument made centuries ago that was brought upon Christ. It is expedient that one man should die for the people than that the whole nation should perish. This argument will appear conclusive, and a decree will finally be issued against those who hallow the Sabbath of the fourth commandment, denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment and giving the people liberty after a certain time to put them to death. Romanism in the Old World and apostate Protestantism in the New will pursue a similar course toward those who honour all the divine precepts. That's 615.2. So she's describing in this history, after the close of probation, there is a death decree. Down to 640.2, she's laying out the events that lead to the second advent. She says that the voice of God is heard from heaven, declaring the day and the hour of Jesus' coming, and delivering the everlasting covenant to his people. Like peals of loudest thunder, his words roll through the earth. So there is a waymark after the death decree, before the second advent, when the day and hour are given of his coming. What I want to suggest is that this is also a repeating pattern. That Daniel 12:1 is Boston. Then you can mark, do it in blue. Concord and Exeter. If we were to bring this down to the reform line of the priests, 2019 to Panium, there must be two waymarks. One of them, taking it from here, would be this concept of a decree. And the second, this waymark of Exeter, would be a message in relation to time. It's a repeating pattern on our reform line, and it's not just here or here, it's in every single dispensation. That's what I'm wanting us to recognise. When we come to 1989, there's an increase of knowledge, formalisation, test. When we come to 2014, there's an increase of knowledge, a formalisation and a test. But also, right from the close of probation, there also must be an increase of knowledge, a formalisation and a test. It is within every single dispensation. So 1989 to 9/11, we see that structure. It therefore must be repeated between 9/11 and 2014. This dispensation must have a Boston, Concord and Exeter. The Boston, the waymark of Boston, is a message unsealed. It isn't fully understood, but it's unsealed. The waymark of Concord is its name gives it away. What does it mean to be in concord? There's that verse in the Bible where it says, what concord can Christ have with Belial? What is that verse saying? What agreement, what unity? Concord means to come into union. If any of you play music or even you're singing, your singing must be in concord. It means that it's in harmony. If you have two chords or a selection of notes in concord, they make a distinct sound, a harmonious sound. A chord. Yes. 1, 3, 5. So when we think of concord, it's unity. Here, at Concord, at the death decree, you have the world in unity. That's why they've been able to make a death decree. They've come to a uniform decision. And we're not going to go into all the examples of that, but it's a characteristic of this waymark. This is a waymark of concord. So is here, so is here, so is here. We started by saying there's 4 periods of time. Within every one of those period of time, there must be a message given. It must swell, be formalized, and then be tested upon it. So what is the message given between 9/11 and 2014? What is this swelling? What's the message between 9/11 and 2014? I want to suggest that it's the message of the 2520. We won't go through that in detail now because we're going to come back to it, particularly because I want to look at the external events of that history. But I'll just mark it for now. 9/11, the 2520 is unsealed. 2005, it's laid out. It isn't fully laid out in its completeness until 2009. I'm going to highlight 2009 in another presentation because of the external events that happen here. But I'm suggesting this is the waymark of the increase of knowledge on the 2520. This is the camp meeting or the school in Arkansas where Elder Parminder lays out the study, the 2520 revealed. 2009 is an increase of knowledge. It continues to swell because this is the dispensation of time setting. This is when time is introduced to the movement, and it's introduced through an understanding of the 2520. So it's unsealed at 9/11. It swells. 2009, it's laid out just like in 1818 when that message is known, but it hasn't completed until 2012. And the 2520 has developed into the 126 and the 151. And we know we can expand on those concepts. But the message of the 2520 hasn't reached the full swelling of the loud cry until it's understood with the concepts of the 126 and the 151. So from 9/11 to 2014, you have that same repeating pattern. First of all, a message is unsealed. Then it swells, which we call the increase of knowledge. It's a period of time, but it's also a waymark. Then it's formalized. And then there's a test. This is the repeating pattern that we find in every single one of those 4 time spans of ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest. So I said first of all that concord has its characteristics that you find in every concord marked on a reform line. So does the waymark of Exeter. 1996, what's the name of that magazine? It's the Time of the End magazine. Whether we fully understood it or not, time has entered our reform line and become a subject. This is a message of time in 1996. It's in the very title. 2012 is just more of an understanding of that message of time. 2018 is time. So the waymark of Exeter, down here, the day and the hour, it's time. The waymark of Exeter also has peculiar characteristics that it threads through every waymark marked by that camp meeting. It brings with it a message related to time. We see that right from 1996. It's not something that just came later. It has been in our reform line from the very beginning. So if that's the characteristic of Exeter, we see it again at 2012, and then again at 2018, and we'll see it again between 2019 and Panium. So there is this development of a message within every dispensation. I want us to think a little bit more about these time periods, just so we can differentiate them. By the way, what does that mean for this period? For the line of the 144,000, there must be a waymark, 2 waymarks between 9/11 and Sunday law. This cannot be empty space for the 144,000. So for the 144,000, Raphia and Panium, I want to suggest that's what they are. They are on that line. They must exist between this empty space of 9/11 and Sunday law. So we have an increase of knowledge, formalisation and a test. What is this test? From 1989 to 9/11, what's the message given that we're tested on? We have the message of Daniel 11, 40 to 45. There's also a message of reform lines. These are the messages that have been given that we're then tested upon. From 9/11 to 2014, what is the message? 25/20 and time setting. This is the test from 9/11 to 2014. 2014 to 2019, what is the test? This is one of the things I want to highlight at the very beginning of our camp meeting. When is time setting a test for the priests? Between here and here. I think there can be a dangerous concept that somehow just because it was accepted in this history that it was a test for our dispensation. Time setting is not our test. November 9 is not our test. It has not been a test for this movement since 2014. It's not the test of the midnight cry. November 9 is not the test of the midnight cry. That concept of time setting was a test in this dispensation, just like Daniel 11, 40 to 45 was a test in this dispensation. So there is a temptation to think somehow that we've accepted November 9, we know what the test is, and we've passed the test. First of all, time setting is not the test for this dispensation. The fact that it was accepted last year just meant that we had to resit it, and when it was presented, it was not fought against. The vast majority of people did not fight it. The reason they didn't fight it is because it wasn't their test. We've already passed that. By the time they resit the exam, they were okay with it. Our test in this history is harder than we might imagine. First of all, it's not time setting. Second of all, it's not November 9. November 9 is just giving us a date or an end point of a test. It's not the test itself. If I was a teacher and I said we're going to have an exam July 30, just knowing the day you sit the exam doesn't help you pass it. It helps you turn up. It's helpful, but it doesn't help you pass it. You still have to sit it. Knowing the day that you have a test in school doesn't give you the answers of the test. It just gives you a framework. It gives you a day that you can arrive at, but it is not the test. Time setting was a test from 9/11 to 2014. It is not part of the Midnight Cry test in this history. So every dispensation has this repeating pattern, and it might look complicated on a board, but if we can just break it down to this one concept, that in every history there must be a message that we're meant to learn that helps aids us in our growth, then it becomes more simple. That each one of these waymarks, 1989, 9/11, 2014, 2019, mark the beginning of a message. And that message is going to test us. So we come to 1996. I'm at church. Not literally, I was little then. But let's say I'm at church, it's 1996, and someone comes to me and they hands me a magazine. It's the Time of the End magazine. I open it up and I read it. So I've read the Time of the End magazine. It's giving the message of Daniel 11, 40 to 45. The message can also be presented, the message of reform lines. I think that was also documented. Someone gives me that when it's printed in 1996. When am I tested on that? Why? Why am I tested here? It's been given to me here. The minute I've been given that message, I'm tested. I'm tested in 1996 on Daniel 11:40-45, and I'm tested on reform lines. This history, 9/11 to 2014, 25-20 swells, 2012 it's laid out, and we understand the 25-20 and time setting. When am I tested on time setting? 2014 or 2012? 2012. This is a little bit simplistic. We can mark the close of probation as a test. But the test is back here. It's progressive. The date is the day you hand in your papers. It's not the day you sit it. In this history, the minute I've been given a Time of the End magazine, I accept or reject it. I don't wait till 9/11 to sit the test. 9/11 to 2014, I don't make my mind up on time setting at some special day in 2014. I've sat it and passed or failed in 2012, and I'm given time to adjust to it, to understand what it means, the implications. So the message or the test in this dispensation from 2014 to 2019, when is our test? It's not November 9. Our test is here. Our test is in 2018 at the midnight cry, and it just takes a period of time till November 9 when we hand in our papers. But the message is the test. It's understanding the message and the implications of it. I want to discuss through the course of the camp meeting what the test for our dispensation is, what particular aspects of the message. But I want us to just consider going back to it was October 3 when November 9 was presented. I think there is really, and it doesn't surprise me, it's completely natural and logical. In the evening of October 3, November 9 was presented. And because November 9 was presented, people identified it as the midnight cry. And then I remember the day it was presented. It was prayer meeting that night, and we stood around and we talked for hours. No one argued about November 9. Why? Because it wasn't our test. No one had a problem with the day. No one in that room had a problem with the day. I know some have left over it, but no one in the room had a problem with the day. What people were battling over was not the afternoon presentation on November 9. What people battled with was the morning presentation. The same day the test was given, but people didn't identify it as a test. They still thought it was November 9 and time setting. The test was the morning, and the test of October 3. The message presented in the morning was one of conspiracy theories and politics. We need to go into more detail to understand what that is, but that starts giving us an idea of what our test for this dispensation is. Our test for the history of 2014 to 2019, which then shouldn't surprise us why we have all of these external events in this history. There's one other point that I want us to make, and then we might just review a little and continue. What makes these messages so hard to hear? 1996, a message is given, the time of the end, Daniel 11:40-45, reform lines. I want to give you a quote. Second selected messages, 389. And I'm going to just paraphrase from quite a few paragraphs. I'm starting at point 3, but I'm going to continue through that passage. After the passing of the time, God entrusted to his faithful followers the precious principles of present truth. These principles were not given to those who had had no part in the giving of the first and second angels' messages. Those who pass through these experiences are to be as firm as a rock to the principles that made us Seventh-day Adventists. The Lord has declared that the history of the past shall be rehearsed as we enter upon the closing work. Every truth that he has given for these last days is to be proclaimed to the world. Every pillar that he has established is to be strengthened. We cannot now step off the foundation that God has established. We cannot now enter into any new organization, for this would mean apostasy from the truth. What is she saying? No new organization. What begins to happen in this history? New organization. Can you see the problem? Why are people rejecting this, fighting over it, what Elder Jeff was doing and presenting? Because they have spirit of prophecy quotes that when they read them, they says that at the end of time, when the closing work is occurring, there is to be no new organisation. That would be apostasy. So people fall away. Even people who've been in the movement for years, they wake up one morning, and I don't think they do wake up one morning. I think that there's been a journey they've gone on that have caused them to do that. But they wake up one morning and say, wait a minute, there's supposed to be new organisation. And then they reject this movement and they fall away. Another quote. First Selected Messages, 188.3. Ellen White has a vision. The Lord showed me that the message must go and that it must not hang on time, for time will never be a test again. What is she saying? Time will never again be a test. What are we saying in 2012? What's our test? Time. So people who've been in the movement for years, who accepted time setting, accepted this, people who've been in the movement for decades, they reject this movement and they go back to the church, and what do they start saying? We're in apostasy because Ellen White says there's no new organisation and no message hang on time. The disagreements people have with what we're doing, particularly when we come to a test, is with how we read. It's a reoccurring cause of disagreement. The reason I want to highlight this now is because this isn't going to be something that goes away. It's going to continue to be a problem. Hopefully, if you've been following this movement and you've heard these messages, you've understood why we understand these quotes in their context, in a framework. We understand what she's saying and why she's saying it, and we're not shaken by those statements. But for people that read a certain way, that just take those quotes and drop them straight into our history without considering their context, considering why she's saying it and what she's actually meaning to say, they trip over them and they cause them to reject these messages. So 1996 is a message. It goes against a straight reading of the spirit of prophecy. If you take them without considering a framework, 2012 is a test, goes straight against spirit of prophecy if you don't consider them in their framework. 2018, this history is not going to be any different. The reason I have been saying, I think I might have been misunderstood in a few ways when I say this, that we need to go back to 2012, is not because we need to accept time setting, we've done that. It's not because we have some type of repentance and work to do. The reason we need to go back to 2012 is because we need to understand how we read. It's going to continue to be a cause of disagreement if we don't come into unity with how we read. And I still believe that while from the time of the end, it's not a methodology that began here, it began back here when we understood how to read these quotes. But when we consider how we take these quotes and how we understand them, in 1996 we were perfectly okay with those quotes because we understood what she's actually saying. 2012, all of a sudden we weren't. Why? Because we're not applying our methodology consistently. Our problem is consistency. If we're going to take something that she says and we're going to just take it as it straight reads, then we're going to have problems. 1996, we know to take it in context. All of a sudden in 2012, we're not doing that. And we're going to trip over again, just like we did then, if we don't become consistent with that method. I don't want to go into detail here, I just want to highlight it. Beginning and end of ancient Israel. Reform line of Moses. Beginning the end of ancient Israel, reform line of Christ. Beginning of modern Israel, Millerites. End of modern Israel, 144,000. What problem does Christ keep coming up against? What does he keep having to face? The writings of Moses. Why? Because the Pharisees didn't know how to read them. They loved them, they treasured them. Conservative Adventists have and love, treasure the writings of Ellen White. But do they know how to read them? So in this history, Christ is doing two things. First of all, he's showing them how they should have read it, because he's saying you never understood it in the first place, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Second of all, he's also seeing that there's been progression. Here, it's circumcision. Here, it's baptism. To come into this history and say that you need to be baptized and circumcision is no longer a test is to reject the writings of Moses if you take them as they read. People haven't been able to move from this history into this one. And to push circumcision in this history, here it's accurate. To push circumcision here, that would have been apostasy. This is beginning and end of ancient Israel. What about the beginning and the end of modern Israel? How do we treat Ellen White and the pioneers? First of all, we need to know what they were originally saying and why. We need to see it in its context. But we also have the issue of progression. What is said here doesn't necessarily relate exactly as it says here, no more than circumcision and baptism. We can see it in their history. Perhaps we don't realise how radical this message was. How they could attack Christ and say he's destroying the work of their pioneers, the work of Moses and Joshua and the patriarchs and the prophets. They can say to John the Baptist, destroying their work when he baptizes these people. The same arguments are made against us, that we're destroying the work of our pioneers. Because first of all, they don't know how to read them. Second of all, they're not seeing progression. God did not take us through 6,000 years of history for no reason. We're also meant to grow and develop in a way that was not possible for other people. For example, the Millerites, 1844, those that successfully passed their test, they're not even keeping the Sabbath. They're breaking the Ten Commandments. If you were to go back into the Dark Ages and see for example, Luther, he was not a nice man. You go into who he was, he really wasn't that nice. He condoned genocide. He asked for it. The way he fought. Morally, he was strong. He was exactly who God needed. He had lots of failings. But he rejected the Sabbath. He clung to Catholic teaching. He was wrong in many ways. But that wasn't then a test for them. It's continued to grow and develop. We have to mark progression in this history, not stay in this 1844, not stay in 1888. We also need to understand what they originally meant when they wrote what they did. The same way Christ comes here and they think it's this radical new teaching. First of all, because they haven't understood Moses. And second of all, because they haven't been willing to progress. So this is why it's a continuing problem. In 2012, it's highlighted again, but it's a problem back here when you have people saying there's no new organisation, our leadership cannot be passed by. It doesn't matter how bad the conference gets, the ship sails through to the very end. I've heard all those arguments presented from conference church pulpits. That's their logic. But they're not understanding how to read any more than the Pharisees do when they say in this history, God would never forsake the line of David. That's a bit of preparation, because we're going to be saying things in this history that you might think go directly against the spirit of prophecy. I want to say that they don't. But we have to be consistent with how we read her writings and how we understand what she meant and how they apply today. If we were to take this repeating pattern, we've done the line of the priests. I don't really want to draw the line of the Levites. To be honest, I will draw it small because we're going to run out of space. It moves one dispensation across. We mark it from 9/11. 9/11 to 2014 is their ploughing. 2014 to 2019 is their early rain. 2019 to Panium is their latter rain. Panium to Sunday Law is their harvest. And in every one of these periods of time, we must identify Boston, Concord, Exeter. Boston, Concord, Exeter. A swelling. In 2009 there's external events. 2012 there's external events. But then I want us to particularly consider the Nethinims. They begin their reform line from 2014. 2014 is the time of the end for Nethinim, for the world. It's the time of the end for the world. They must have an increase of knowledge, a formalization, and a test. They must experience the same from 2019 to Panium, from Panium to Sunday Law, from Sunday Law to Daniel 12:1. Those 4 dispensations. So for every living person today who's not an Adventist, they have existed on a reform line from 2014 as a movement. What's testing them? What's preparing them? What is this early work of ploughing? Who's doing that? Because it's not us. This movement is not doing this early work of preparation. We also don't do the early rain or the latter rain. We'll get to those periods. But what's preparing them? Since 2014, there's been an escalation of external events. If you think how different the world looked back in this history before 2014, it's no wonder it's become so toxic so quickly. It's what's dividing already 2 groups of worshippers in the world. 2 classes of people. And this is occurring completely and only through external events. So 2014, it's the beginning work, it's preparation. 2016, there's an increase of knowledge. It's the election, the 2016 election. 2018, it's formalised. 2019 is their 9/11 test. I want us to note the external events are doing this. So whatever they're going through in this history must be what we're going through in our history from 1989 to 9/11. And what prepared us? What was our ploughing work? There's a Berlin Wall, there's events, there's external events. What I want us to particularly note is that from 1989 to 9/11, it's the work of the three angels' message, a prophetic testing message that divides two groups of worshippers. But is there only one message in this history? No. If you take one message, if you reject that, what else are you taking hold of? You must have an alternative. There must be something else you believe. So in this history, from the time of the end, there are two streams of information. You have two choices, two different narratives. One is the truth. One I want to call conspiracy theories. You can describe it in different ways. 9/11, you have the same issue. It's the theme of our reform line. Many people in Adventism reject 9/11. Why? Because they listen to Walter Weiss and they hear Islam never attacked. It was an inside job. It was the work of the United States and George Bush and the Illuminati and the secret societies. And they reject this movement because they refuse to see that Islam struck at 9/11. So even though there is clear external evidence, they see the conspiracy theories, and it causes them to reject this message. 1989, you have the same thing. People think the fall of the Soviet Union was Gorbachev and an inside job. They don't see the fall of the King of the South. There's many things in this history that are not recognised, that people won't recognise because of these conspiracy theories. 1996, the formalisation of the message. There's two new news streams set up online. We'll go into that in more detail. 1996, you have the New York Post go online. It's an old newspaper, but it goes online. The New York Times. The Washington Post goes online. MSNBC. Begins operation. Yahoo News begins operation. On the other side of the spectrum, Fox begins. This is the work of Rupert Murdoch. When did Rupert Murdoch set up his first news organisation? 1989 in the United Kingdom. He began it in 1989. He moved to the United States in 1996. These external events perfectly fit the progression of our reform line. We'll discuss that. I think this was Sun News in 1989.
You have until 11.
11:15?
Yeah.
Okay, 20. Thanks. So 1989, Rupert Murdoch sets up. I think it's called The Sun. I'm not sure. We'll go through that with a different set of notes. But you can mark him in 1989. You can mark all the people that are connected to Fox News. Roger Ailes. I'm not sure about Sean Hannity, but there was another one. He was their biggest. Bill O'Reilly, 1989. You can place them in 1989 repetitively, but it's in 1996 they all come together and form the Fox News network with Roger Ailes. So in 1996 you have this issue of two streams of information, but it goes through all our waymarks. It's the theme of these two streams, and you can see that not just in this history, 1989 to 9/11, where these streams first show themselves, and I want to say it didn't begin with Fox News. Conspiracy theories didn't begin there, but what they did was they came together in a way that is going to impact future events in a way that I think we're only just beginning to grapple with. So 2014 forward, externally, first of all, internally, 1989 to 9/11. Internally, you have two streams of information. You have a message. You have Elder Jeff, Time of the End magazine. He's talking about reform lines and Daniel 11. This true stream of information. Now, if I was a critic, would I look at this and say it was perfect? If I was a critic, I'd come to it and I'd say, why are you saying the King of the South is defeated? Why is there all of these bits missing? I might have a problem with it. What I want to say is that it's perfect for its dispensation. And then it continues to grow and develop, but it was perfect for the time that it was needed in. So also you have what I want to call a perfect message. You also have an alternative. You also have the church and their explanation of events, particularly when it comes to Walter Veith, but there are others that worked with him. Good moral men, some of them really nice, but they worked with him in sharing these conspiracy theories. 2014 to 2019 is no different. You must, for the Nethinims, have two streams of information, two different stories about what is happening globally. You have many of them saying 2014 we're under the judgment of God. The reason we're under God's judgment is because our nation is immoral. We have school shootings, not because of guns, but because we don't allow prayer in schools. We have natural disasters, not because of global warming, because we don't believe in that either. We have natural disasters because of gay pride marches. They're rejecting clear external truths to favour conspiracy theories and bring about this concept of the judgment of God. So you have conspiracy theories, but you also therefore must have truth, a true stream of information. And this true stream, for the dispensation that it's in, must be perfect. However we want to define perfection. And we have a Boston Concord Exeter, Boston Concord Exeter. If you've been following the presentations and you've seen some of the waymarks that have been put in place, there's a waymark after 2019. We usually term the counter-revolution 2020. I'm suggesting that's the waymark of Concord. And what do we mark in 2020? We mark the counter-revolution, but we also pick one particular revolution, the American Revolution. And what battle is that? It's the Battle of Concord and Lexington. It's a characteristic of this waymark. Back in 2016, you have disinformation, which you could call conspiracy theories. I think disinformation might be a better word, perhaps. Disinformation is shared from two sources. One, it's shared directly from Donald Trump and Cambridge Analytica. We'll go into that. The other, it's shared from Vladimir Putin. Trump shares it through Cambridge Analytica. Putin shares it through an agency known as the Internet Research Agency. He set it up around 2013, 2014. Its first work was to spread disinformation on the Crimea invasion in 2014, the incidents with Ukraine. So 2014, in this history, you have Trump beginning to use Cambridge Analytica and Putin beginning to use the Internet Research Agency. It's in 2016 that both of these parties use it to interfere in the election. Cambridge Analytica did its work in the shadows. It wasn't open information in that history until one conference in 2016. It's a huge conference. It was set up in 2011. The first speaker was former President George Bush. It's a seriously influential conference. When I think the CEO of Cambridge Analytica spoke in that conference, he was speaking in front of some of the world's most powerful people. George Soros was in the audience. World leaders, billionaires, many people in that audience heard him speak. And it was Alexander Nix that spoke at that conference, and he laid out the way Cambridge Analytica works. And then at the end of his speech, he said that we're also working in the 2016 election. He said, I think he says the election's in 7 weeks, wait and see who wins, and when you see who wins, remember who won that election. He's crediting his own company. This is 2016, and that conference is called Concordia. Trump is using disinformation in 2016. Putin is using disinformation through the Internet Research Agency. How does he fund the Internet Research Agency? Through an external company, Concord Management and Consulting. Whether it's the Battle of Lexington and Concord, or Concord and Management and Consulting, or Concordia, it's a characteristic of this waymark. We haven't yet gone back to 2009 to look for it, but you can see its characteristics. 2020, Concord and Lexington, 273 British casualties. We talk about a waymark between Panem and Sunday Law. Based on the number 273. They have characteristics that you can stitch together. Whether it's a Boston or Concord or an Exeter, carries with it certain characteristics. So our reform line is really built on this repeating structure or repeating pattern. And it's not just for the priests or the 144,000, it's also for the Nethinims. And this stream of disinformation, it exists in their history. There is also a true stream, and what it is doing from the very, very beginning is already dividing two classes of worshippers. If we come into our history of the priests, can we enter a reform line in 1989, reject the increase of knowledge, reject the formalisation, reject 9/11, and have any hope at 2014 or 2019? No. So when we come down to this history, and we want to engage in a work of harvest, they're already divided. They're divided from here. If in 2014 someone starts to hear these conspiracy theories, they start to turn against, or they probably have long had that belief system, but they turn against Obama and the Clinton, they imbibe these conspiracy theories about George Soros and globalization and their New World Order and secret societies. They take on those characteristics. 2016, their increase of knowledge. They're at a Trump rally. 2018, Donald Trump shows his characteristics. We're going to discuss that in much more detail. They stand on Trump's side. 2019, they're still on his side and they're turning more against mainstream media. What hope do they have at Panem or Sunday Law or Daniel 12:1? As a movement, unless they're an individual and they can repent, which is hard when you've taken on conspiracy theories because you distrust everything. But if they're on that side of the issue in this history, there is no hope. These external events are already dividing two groups of people. So, to review, and then we'll continue this in the next presentation. We took the line of the 144,000. We laid it out as it is from 1989 to 9/11, these characteristics of an increase of knowledge formalisation test. Then we brought that to Sunday Law to Daniel 12:1, and we laid out the exact same pattern. Swelling of the loud cry, formalisation test. It repeats. But then we also see that there's events between Daniel 12:1 and the second advent. The death decree and the message of time. We laid them on the reform line, and we saw again a repeating pattern. Based on 3 witnesses, there must therefore be 2 events between 9/11 and Sunday Law for the 144,000. For the priests, we laid out their reform line, 1989 to 9/11, 2014 to 2019. It's these 2 main structures. But therefore we also must have a message that's unsealed and begins to swell from 9/11. That was the message of the 2520. The increase of knowledge waymark, where we see that outlined, is the 2520 revealed. 2012, though, it swelled to its utmost with the message of time setting. And 2014, we can see the end part of that dispensation. We hand in our papers, so to speak. 2014, another message is unsealed. It swells to 2016, the US election, our understanding of Daniel 11. It continues to swell until it climaxes in 2018, but we're sitting our test now and the message has not stopped growing. The test is not time setting and it is not November 9. 2019, we're going to repeat that structure. It'll be a new message and a new test. We have to get to terms with this one so that we're ready for this. What people keep tripping up every single time a message is opened, whether it's in this dispensation or in this dispensation, they've tripped over how we read. And the reason they're doing that is because they're still in 1888 history. They haven't entered into a new reform line. They're unwilling to see that God would open up light to his people that he would not have given to the pioneers or to Ellen White. They're unwilling to see progression. They're also unwilling to take those statements in their context and see how we apply them to our time. It's the exact same repeat of what you would see from the writings of Moses to the time of Christ, when they, for a good Pharisee, they begin to break down the writings of Moses. Really what he's doing is explaining them and giving them clarity. So time setting a test for this dispensation. 2019 is the end point. We hand in our papers, but the test point is back here, and we're in it now. We're going to repeat that. It's the same for the Levites. They have more of an interaction with us, but particularly what they're meant to see is these external events. From 9/11 to 2014, there's external events connected to 2009 to 2012 that I want us to discuss. And we'll go through that. But they've had their ploughing work. Then they've had their early rain, 2014 to 2019. Again, external events that are preparing them. And that pattern continues. Just to highlight one point, 2019, what is it? Close of probation and raffia. We focus on our reform line. So 2019 is close of probation. But what else is it? It's Sunday law. It's 9/11. It's all of these things. There's much more happening this year than just our close of probation. We have to also consider it from each perspective. It's not just going to be a waymark of Daniel 12:1 and this test. It's also a Sunday law. So we should be seeing those characteristics develop. It's also 9/11. So we should see those characteristics develop, that kind of test. It's all three of these, depending on what group of people you're speaking to. But if it's a Sunday law, it has that characteristics. We can also recognize that. Each one, priests, Levites and Nethinims, all sit a test on this day. These two, Levites and Nethinims, sit a test in this history, not just on the day, but in this history, without having any message of time setting or any knowledge of November 9, because the date won't help them. The date is not the test. So they're sitting a test just like we are, without any message of time. So when we sit a test, go through this testing history, we're tested here separate to the concept of time setting. We come to the Nethinims, we looked at their history. We're going to go into 2016, 2018, both of them are battles. 2019 a battle. So we will trace those external events. And then we also see 2019 to Panim, those same characteristics. Panem to Sunday law, Boston, Concord, Exeter, and then we begin to see that we can stitch the Concords together. 2016, Concordia, Concord Management and Consulting. 2020, which is here, Concord and Lexington. After Panem, the 273. They have particular characteristics. So does Exeter. 1996 is an Exeter. It's a formalisation of a message. Time of the End magazine, 2012, time setting, 2018, November 9. It's a characteristic of that waymark. What we also see is there's not just one message dividing two groups of people. There's two. Both externally and internally. Inside Adventism in this history, you can see conspiracy theories about how we relate to external events, but it also is developing externally, where you have two streams. One of them pure, one of them safe, one of them not safe. Conservative right-wing media. It's not just Fox News, but Fox News is the really the head of that movement. So we come to 2014, you have a movement of Nethinims. They're being divided by two separate streams of information. Before we close, I would like us to consider the Time of the End magazine. I'll just find it. Too many tabs open. Here we go. The Time of the End magazine. If you're to go down to page 8. I'm just going to paraphrase a little from page 8. The light that Daniel received from God was given especially for these last days. The visions he saw by the banks of the Ulai and the Hiddekel, the great rivers, how many rivers? 2. Of Shinar are now in process of fulfillment, and all the events foretold will soon come to pass. Elder Jeff is quoting from Testimonies to Ministers 112 and 113. The vision on the banks of the Ulai is the vision of Daniel 8, and the only part of the vision by the Ulai which had not been fulfilled when Sister White made this statement was Daniel 8:14. He goes on to describe it. And then he speaks of the Hiddekel. When the Hiddekel flows into the sea, it ceases to exist. So too, when the king of the north comes to his end, none shall help. So there are two rivers flowing to two symbolic bodies of water, two streams of information, the Ulai to the sea of glass, the Hiddekel to the lake of fire. This is 1996. The message of time is introduced from the very beginning of this movement. Two streams of information, conspiracy theories, all that we're developing now is not new. It was part of the message from the Time of the End. It's in the Time of the End magazine. Time setting is in the Time of the End magazine. Two streams of information are in the Time of the End magazine. When Elder Jeff lays out the Ulai and the Hiddekel, one will take you to the lake of fire. This stream of information will take a Nethinim to the lake of fire. This stream of information will take him to the sea of glass. Two rivers flowing to two symbolic bodies of water. Two visions representing both the stories of the redeemed and the stories of the lost. As these rivers flow into the sea, their messages cross the boundary line of human probation, forever separating the righteous and the wicked. So, from 2014, the Time of the End for the world, there is the Ulai and the Hiddekel. And the message of two streams of information has been part of this message, like everything we're teaching from the very beginning. All we're doing is having a better and a greater understanding of what it means. But it exists from here. These two streams of information, the Ulai and the Hiddekel, they have to develop the world, because by the time we get to Sunday law, we're entering their harvest. They're a fully grown plant. So what has helped them grow? What's planted them and what's watered them? It's not us. It's true and false streams of information that decide a wheat and a tare. If you'll kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you, Lord, that you help us, you lead us so gently and slowly. We don't have to absorb everything at once, Lord. But you opened up everything in 1989, and then for 30 years you've had patience. And even now you have patience. And we know that there is tests coming, information coming in the dispensations that have not yet arrived, Lord. And thank you for bearing with us so patiently that we don't sit them now. I pray that what we are to recognise now, that you'll help us to recognise, that we will have a correct worldview and understanding both of inspiration, how we understand it, how we read, and also of external events, that we can know that we have a firm platform beneath our feet. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.